I have a guest speaker this morning, as I told you. But first, I wanted to just kind of set it up a little bit. Remember John Adams? John and Sue came and talked about their little girl drowning, and of course, John's been here a few times. He's an old friend of mine. When John came to speak about, is God enough? After he talked to me, he said, if you're looking for a really powerful story, you might want to have my friend Bill up here. So I called Bill, and we chatted for quite a while. He told me a story, and it was quite powerful. And so we plugged him in. He's been really busy, and it's been hard to get him up here. He had to drive at least a couple hours this morning, right? From 4 hours this morning. Yeah, and our friends from down the street couldn't come because the Bengals are playing today. I was just reading this morning about Jesus doing some miracles, and then I was looking up again just about how he was doing it. And people were getting healed all over the place. And then one day these Jews came to Jesus and they said, "Hey, we want to see another miracle." And he said, "I'm not going to show you any miracles." And he's doing them all over the place, right? But they wanted to see like a trickery. Show us some miracle right now, because you're like our voodoo king or something. And he said, the only miracle, the only sign you're going to see is the sign of Jonah. And they, of course, didn't understand that. But being Jews, if they looked it up, they would have seen that Jonah was in the body of a fish for 3 days. And then what Jesus was saying was that he was going to show them a miracle. He was going to go down into the ground, and he was going to come out 3 days later and bring life with him. I'm one of those guys that's kind of suspicious of every story where I hear a miracle. It's just kind of in my nature. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's my military days, or I don't know what it is. But I just, I'm always suspicious of a miracle. And yet, when you see the real thing, and you know the real thing, God's not showing off. He's just doing what he does. Today, I think you're going to hear a story of a miracle that would blow your mind. Bill, come on up. Give it up. I know it's not for Bill, it's for Jesus. But can you give it up for our guest speaker today, Bill?
Good morning. I really don't know where to start. It's going to be difficult to put everything that I want to tell you in, but I'm going to kind of hit the high points. But we never know what the Lord's going to take us through. And, he doesn't just take us to something, he takes us through something. But in January of 2009, we had a lot of snow, and it was just January 27th was just a typical snow day for us. And the kids were out of school, and it was a high time of their moment that they don't have to go to school. It's just playtime. So we live on a farm, and every year we have a mini truck or a tractor or sometimes a Jeep. You never know what we're going to use, but we have a big long plastic hay trough, feed trough that we feed in. And we'll hook it to the back and we'll pull the kids through the fields. And we may have 10, 12 kids in it at one time. That morning we started early and just started out just like an ordinary day, and probably pulled for maybe an hour. And my wife was at home. She was fixing breakfast, and she called me on the radio and said that she had breakfast done. So we started to go back up to the house, and as we got back up home, me and my son started in the house, and we looked back, and my daughter was just kind of sitting in the trough, and she said, "Daddy, take me back to the field." My daughter at the time, she was 14 years old, and she gives me that little puppy dog look. I tell her, I said, "Come on, Catherine, we got all day. You guys probably going to have several days off of school." So I said, we'll just go back in. And she said, "No, I want you to take me back down now." So I told my son, I said, "Going in the house, tell Mommy and Kate went back to the field." And I said, "We'll be right back. We're just going to do 2 quick laps." And so we take off. And earlier I had, from going up and down the field and the roadway areas and stuff where we live on our farm, we had wore a hole in the plastic feed trough on one end. So I had just taken the feed trough and turned it around because the snow was hitting them in the face. And I turned it around and tied the rope to the other end, and just moments before this, and then So we headed back to the field. I said, we'll do 2 quick laps and we'll come back. So, the second lap around the field, I just got a eerie feeling that something was wrong. And I looked back, and all I had behind me was just a tethered rope. And I turned, and as I come back around, I seen just a little ball laying up against a fence, a gate post. And as I drive over there, she was a mess. My daughter had hit right here on this side of her forehead, had hit a 10-inch round steel post. Blood was everywhere, had blood and spinal fluid coming from her ear and her nose. And I just pick her up. You don't really know what to do in a situation like that, but I pick her up and I put her in the little mini truck like a gator. And I grabbed the radio and I called my wife and I said, call 911. Catherine's been hurt. And any other time my wife would have grabbed a cordless phone or something. But at that time she grabbed a wall mount phone. And as we get back up to the house, I didn't stop. I just immediately picked her up, put her over in a full-size truck, and hit the OnStar button. And my wife couldn't even come outside and see my daughter. That's probably best. I immediately just left and headed for the hospital. They had a surgery team standing by. I'd already told them what had happened, and not really even sure how we got there, because there was moments that I had both hands on her and talking to OnStar. And, at that point, God had the will. He had control. But we get to the hospital, and as we get to the hospital, they take her in a room, and my neighbor goes up and picks up my wife and takes my son over to his house to stay with his family, and brings my wife up to the hospital. And the doctors had come out and talked to me and my wife, and they said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to move your daughter to a room. And he said, there's not really anything we can really do at this time. We're going to have a team talk to you when they move her upstairs. And we're just going to kind of brief you on what's going on. So they took her upstairs, and they came in and took us in a room, and they said, we're just going to give you and your wife your time with your daughter. We don't expect your daughter to survive. He said that she had hit so hard that she had the same injury that killed Dale Earnhardt. Said she had shattered everything inside of her skull, her sinus passages, just everything in her skull was shattered. And they weren't just pop-shotting an idea that they had medical evidence to show that they don't come through that. And they said, but we're going to give you and your wife time with your daughter. And they put us in a room, and immediately I just walked over to the bed, and I just crawled up in the bed beside her and just picked her up and held her in my arms. And I cried. And I prayed. And I just clung to God. I did that all night long. The nurses came in several times throughout the night. They never asked me to stop. Never asked me to put her down, get out of the bed. They just gave us our time. The next morning, the doctors come in, nurse come in. They said, so your daughter has sustained through the night, and we don't expect this injury to be fatal, but you're not going to have anything to take home. Said, your daughter's a mess. And he said, just to compare of what kind of stay you're looking at here, they said there's a boy 4 doors down in the hospital here. He's been here for 5.5 weeks. He's got a similar injury to your daughter. He can move a few of his limbs, recognize a few of his family members, and he's had to relearn a lot of things. He can't feed himself. He can't do any of that. Your daughter is far worse than him. Your daughter's going to have to relearn everything in life, who everybody is. She's like an infant. That was my baby girl. She was just a hick chick. She grew up on a farm, and she just enjoyed life. I couldn't imagine her being anything different than what she had always been. So I just continued to cry and continue to pray, continue to cling on God. Later that day, I was driving home. I had to go home and gas up generators. I never stayed away. I only went home to gas generators up, and a couple of times I stopped by the church just to let everybody know what God was doing. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew He had a plan. But as I was driving home to gas up the generators, I stopped. Stopped on a little place in Getaway near my farm, and I pulled over to the side of the road and on the bridge, and I just put my truck in park and reached over and got my Bible off the dash. And I said, Lord, I believe every word in your book from cover to cover. And I said, I believe with all my heart you're forever the same, never changing. I said, I read in John 15:13 that no greater love hath a man than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. And I said, because of that, I said, I just want you to take all the breath out of my body right now. Just for me to know that my daughter is going to walk out of that hospital and be her. Just be the way she's always, not be different, not be maimed, just be her. And I just waited a few minutes. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, I said, also read in John chapter 11 that there was a man that Jesus loved, and his name was Lazarus. I said, I read that after 4 days, you raised him from the dead, stinking and decaying. But he was complete the very instant you spoke his name. And I said, I believe that. And I said, your word tells us that. I said, I believe that with all my heart. I said, if you're forever changing, yesterday, today, forever, there's no reason that you can't do that today. And I said, and I'm not telling you this just so you will know. I'm not telling you this to remind you, because I don't have to remind you. But I said, your word tells us we're supposed to petition you with your word. And I said, Lord, that's what I'm doing. I said, you're not a respecter of persons, but you do respect your word. And I said, right now, I said, the doctors had told me that they were going to wait for the skull fractures to close and the fluid to stop draining from her ear. And they said that should happen in 10 to 14 days. And if it didn't close up, that they would open up her skull and relieve the pressure. And if that didn't work, then they really didn't know what they were going to do at that point. But he said, but even at that point, they didn't know when she was going to come out of a coma. And I said, it could be 2 years, it could be 2 months, it could be 2 weeks. I said, Lord, I'm just a man. I'm selfish and I'm stingy. And I said, I don't want to wait 2 weeks. I don't want to wait 2 days, 2 years. I said, I want you to speak my daughter's name. I said, it's 6:15 right now. And I said, I want you to call my daughter's name just like you did for Lazarus. I said, not because of who I am, but because of who you are. And I left there with such a peace and went on home and gassed up the generators and fed the livestock. And I just couldn't imagine the peace that I was having knowing the shape that my daughter was in. But I stopped back by our church on the way back, and it was on a Wednesday night, and I just kind of shouted the roof off the place because I just said everybody's going to be amazed at what God does. I really didn't know what was going to happen. I just felt that. More than one time I had people tell me that I had to come to terms with what was going on. I just need to accept it. That would set me on fire in my spirit because I didn't want to receive that. I felt God had something more in store. And as I get back to the hospital, Catherine was in her room. They had her downstairs, and her regular nurse wasn't there. She had to run home, and she said that she would be back. During this time, they had told us that they said, you take a real good look at your daughter, you're not going to recognize her 24 hours from the accident. They said her head will swell really large, and she'll turn black and blue. And said you won't even recognize her, but just it's normal. It's to be expected. Within 30 minutes of them telling us that, the knot that she had, and the scab fell off within 30 minutes. The knot disappeared. She never even had a black eye. I told my wife, I said, that's God telling us that regardless of what circumstances are, regardless of what we see, He's in control. And I said, He has her right here. And I said, we'll just continue to pray. And as I'm waiting for them to bring Catherine back upstairs, they bring her in, they put her back in the room, and my wife really didn't even understand. They said that they were running some CT scans. And so her regular nurse came back in about midnight that night. She came in and knocked on the door. Every 2 hours they were coming in and checking her temperature. And she said, it's me again, Catherine, I'm going to check your temperature. And she walked over and she checked her temperature, and Catherine raises her arm. They've been checking temperature on her arm. Her eyes are wide open, but they say that she's still in a coma. Well, I'm shouting, I'm praising the Lord, and doctors come running in and they say, no, your daughter's in a coma. She doesn't know what she's doing. I said, why is she raising her arm? They said they've raised that arm every 2 hours since she's been in that hospital. It's repetitive motion. She's as an infant. She doesn't know anything that she's doing. She'll have to relearn everything in life. And I said, well, me and my wife were crying when he was telling us that because, one, I didn't want to receive that my daughter was as an infant. And I said, you just watch what happens in this room. I said, because you're going to be amazed. I felt that, I said, the prayer's already been spoken. The answer, we just haven't seen it manifest yet. But it's coming. 2 hours went by just like that. Nurse comes back in, knocks on the door. Catherine, it's me again. I'm going to check your temperature. As she walks toward the bed, Catherine sits up in the bed and opens her mouth and raises her tongue. They hadn't been doing that. How'd she know to do that? The nurse drops a clipboard and she turns around, turns the light on. She comes over to the bed and she says, well, let's just see if we can get her to talk. And she said, Catherine, do you hurt anywhere? She reaches up and starts rubbing her neck. And the nurse says, they'd done so many CT scans and x-rays, they knew there wasn't anything else broke. But she said, so your neck hurt? And Catherine says, my throat's sore. And that's where they put a tube in her mouth. the first 24 hours expecting her to swell. And she said, anything else? She says, I got a headache and my ear hurts. And I'm just shouting. I'm going nuts over here. And the nurse looks at me and she says, you know the fluid quit draining out of her ear, right? I said, no, nobody told me that. When did that happen? And she opens, looks back, and she says, the nurse reported at 6:15. So, so then I had to shout some more. But that told them, because they're there and they're doctors, that told them that immediately they had to take her to surgery because the swelling on the brain had got so bad that the fluid had been shut off. So that's why they had her downstairs doing CT scans. And at 6:24, they had a CT scan that showed all of the skull fractures in her head were closed up. The bleeding on the brain that they were going to remove by surgery had stopped and disappeared. We continue to praise God and hug on Catherine and just love on her and talk to her. And I said, I'm going to have to go home and fill up generators. I said, and that was just something for distraction. The whole generator thing, the Lord, God put that distraction there. The devil was using that as a distraction to keep our mind off of what was going on. But it was just stretching us. And I told her, I said, I've got to go fill generators. I said, you need anything? And she said, bring me a milkshake. I said, the heck with them generators. I said, I'll go find this girl a milkshake. And the nurse said, well, she probably can't have it. The doctor hasn't released her to have anything. Only wet her lips with a sponge. And I said, well, if she wants a milkshake, she's getting a milkshake. So I went and got one and come back, and the doctor met me and said, yeah. I said, go ahead and try it. I said, she probably won't be able to keep it down, but you can try it. Well, she drank the whole milkshake. And I go on home and gas up generators and come back. And as I'm coming back, I'm wearing my Carhartt jacket, and I'm carrying hers in my arm. And he could tell that I had a few other things that she wanted from home, so she was still having trouble saying some things, and she wanted a pad to write on and eraser board and her computer and things. So as I'm coming back, the doctor saw me and he says, you brought her jacket to her? And I said, well, maybe I should have called first. She might need boots by now. And he said, Mr. Klaiber, he said, you really need to come to terms with what's going on. He said, I'm not trying to bring you down, but he said, your daughter's young, and she's going to need the best therapy that she can get. And said, you're going to need to fly her to Cincinnati at least twice a week, probably for several months. And he said, we've had other families have to do that, and we can hook you up with the procedures and stuff, and even get you some financial help to do that. They said, she won't be able to ride in a car for maybe 6 months. They said, long term down the road, hopefully we could get her to walk with a walker in about 2 years. She couldn't stand up at that time. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't really do anything. He said, your daughter is still in really bad shape. And as I'm walking away, I get from here to the door down the hallway from the doctor, and I'm on fire. I'm just burning up. And I just turned around and I hollered. I said, hey, Doc. Everybody in the hallway looks. I said, you just watch what God's doing in that room. You're going to be amazed at how fast my daughter needs boots. And I just continued to pray, continued to cling on God. And on Sunday, me and my daughter were walking down the hallway in the hospital. I'm holding her hand. By the time we got to the end of that hallway, she's holding just my finger. And we didn't know where anybody was in that hospital. I had no clue. And as we get to the end of the hallway and turn to come back, the patient's room door opens up and the doctor steps out. It's her doctor. And I looked at him and I said, "What do you say now, Doc?" Well, he looked at me and he looked at her, and he could have said anything. He's just a man. But he said, "I'm astonished." Well, that night before, I was reading in Scripture where Jesus rose Jairus' daughter from the dead. And it said the people were astonished with great astonishment. So time after time after time, that man could have said anything. But I said, I believe the Lord put those words on his lips because he wouldn't have said, "I'm astonished." But he did that day. But he put those words on his lips just for confirmation to us of what he was doing and what he was bringing us through. That, all in short, my daughter was in that hospital for 9 days. God brought a snowstorm into the tri-state. They said that she would never go back to school, probably never graduate. Shut down all the schools for 9 days. John Adams was her teacher at that time, so he's very familiar with the whole situation. And the day that she got dismissed from the hospital, the school was on a 2-hour delay. She didn't have to be there till 10 o'clock. My daughter never missed a day's school. All the schools were closed down for the time that she was in the hospital. She never had a day's marked absent. We were afraid as parents to let her go to school a lot of times and kept her home a lot. But we would go get her schoolwork. She would do it at home because Dad was still walking around like this. Dad was a nervous wreck. Dad didn't want her to fall and be back in a coma at any given second. 2 months after her follow-up, or after she got out, we went for a follow-up, and the little boy that they had told us that was no better, that was just down the hall that they compared her to, his mom was a drug addict. She just didn't have that relationship with God. She wasn't raised up in church. She didn't know anything about God. The grandmother to that boy was in church. And she couldn't understand why her grandson was in such bad shape. And he got released the day before my daughter. I couldn't believe that our daughter was facing death, but yet she was walking around. I told her we never understand everything that Lord has planned in. We just have to follow it. And I give her a book on prayer and healing. And I told her, I said, you listen to every word those doctors tell you, just so you'll know how to pray, just so you'll know what to ask for. Because you have to know, sometimes you have to be specific in what you ask for. But as we parted ways, we didn't figure we would ever see them again. As I'm with that doctor for a follow-up visit with her, I see that little boy come zigzagging between the chairs where I'm sitting. And he comes over and he said, "You're that guy that prayed for me in that hospital." Well, it was nothing I did. If God hadn't used me, he would have used somebody else. If I hadn't done what I was supposed to do, he would have sent somebody else. If the whole thing happened just to put me there so I could pray with that guy, I would go through it again. But I couldn't believe it. I said, "Oh my gosh," I said, where's your grandma?" She said, "Well, she's outside parking the car with Mom." He said, "Mom got in church. Mom's whole life got changed. We got all new friends." And he said, "Do you think God healed me?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I'll tell you what you do." I said, "You write down everything you remember and everything you know that happened in that hospital." I said, "Because somewhere along the line, you're going to be facing something in life that you need to know that." And we go on in to see the doctor, and as we go in, I'm still like this with my daughter, walking alongside of her. And the doc looks at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just being a dad." I said, "I'm still concerned that she may fall sometime and hit her head." And he said, "You still don't get it, do you?" He puts a slide up on the screen and he says, this is a picture of your daughter, skull. This is an x-ray we did. And it showed this shattered skull and sinus passages. And he said, this is the one we done at 622. Or 626, I think is what it was. But in that one, it showed all the skull fractures were closed up. And he said, now, if these were just closed up and closed, you'd still see the cracks. He said, they're closed up as if it never happened. They're not just closed up. They're just not together. He said, in this one, it's as if it never happened. He said, there's no bleeding on the brain, no blood residual, nothing to remove. He said, your daughter would have to hit as hard right now as what she did then to be back in that state. So, God just stepped right in the middle of our mess, and he worked this out. And I guess he didn't do it because of who I was. He didn't do it because anything I did. He didn't do it because of anything that I specifically asked for. I could never do anything worthy of receiving a blessing like that. He just did it because who he is. He likes to shine in our lives, and he's still very much able to do any kind of miracle in anybody's life at any given time. We have to be ready not to accept something by chance and look for hope and just ask God to step right in the middle of it and fix it and give it up. Just hand it over to him. And I don't know what any of you may be facing today, tomorrow, next week. But whatever it is, God is enough. He will take you through it. If he takes you to it, he'll take you through it. Really enjoyed speaking. That's really all I have.
Sure looks pretty good there. As Bill was speaking, I just, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a conviction. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but how I said I'm always super suspicious, of miracles and things like that. And I'll tell you why, because there's so much fake stuff goes on in the world today and in the church, and you can send some money and somebody will send you a prayer cloth and basically they're just getting rich. And so I think we become a little bit jaundiced, to that kind of thinking. And our hearts get a little hard because it's, it's just now is anything real? But you know what Jesus said? One day he got this little boy, and it didn't say boy, it said child. I just assumed it was a child boy. But anyway, he got a little child, and he set him on his lap. And he said to all the people who were walking around, unless you stop what you're doing and become like this little child and have the faith of a little child, you will never see the kingdom of heaven. That's the truth. The enemy, I'm going to preach about this next week, but the enemy is very busy. Yeah. And we struggle against this evil that's all around us at all times. And we think we're fighting other people. We think we're fighting each other. We think we're fighting ourselves. But the truth is we're fighting a very powerful foe. And he wants to destroy our faith. He wants us to think the way the world thinks. And I'm just here, to close this up and say this is the deal. The sign of Jonah happened. Jesus died on that cross, and he went into the tomb, and he came out 3 days later. And what he's saying is, believe it. It is a miracle. And put your trust in it. And even as simple as it seems, put your trust in it, because it is your only hope. And everything else you see and you think is, important isn't. It just isn't. Today, if you don't know that overwhelming, life-changing truth that Jesus is the Son of God and died, poured out his blood for your sins, for my sins, then you're still hopeless. But he says, I am the hope. And I just encourage you today, even if it's right now, if you need prayer, if you want to talk to somebody or talk to God, come on up here while the band plays. Father, thank you, Lord, for Bill, for his daughter, Catherine, and for their family. Father, thank you mostly for just the testimony that you give of yourself. What you can just do, just the utterance of a prayer that's prayed in faith.